So so obviously I'm Muslim and I'm also a feminist. I don't know if I'm a Muslim feminist. I don't really, I don't necessarily know if the two words have to go together, but they're certainly both parts of my identity. Feminism, is the radical notion that women are people. As I'm paraphrasing someone right there, but in essence, for me, feminism is one part of the wider struggle that I feel invested in by virtue of my faith, which is that I believe in the equality of all people before God. I believe in a state of balance on earth, which is currently very unbalanced. I think that if you look at the world as a totality, there's very few cultures where when men have not been restrained through legal measures, that they have actively brutalized, oppressed, repressed women and often children. And so it seems to me that the lowest, there is a sort of lower basic self in humans, but in men, because there is the use of violence in the enactment of it, that has been to the detriment of other beings. So men have used violence, and I use men specifically as opposed to humans. Men have used violence to essentially, in many ways, establish a world to their singular advantage. And I think this is a pattern repeated, like I say, across the globe. And I think it's ethics, however you define them, which have sought to restrain men's basic nature by calling on all humans, but perhaps with an additional responsibility vis-a-vis those who have the means of violence on their side, to create a world in which everything is in balance and all beings are respected in their full humanity. And like I say, for me, that's women, children, it's the animals we live alongside, it's the nature that is our backdrop. So feminism is part of a wider struggle for a balanced world, mizan, in our faith, the concept of mizan. And so it seems to me an absolutely essential struggle for anyone who claims to be a person of ethics, a person of faith, actually, that it's very clear to me that women continue to experience the hard end of many wedges, be it here or be it in other parts of the world, and much worse in other parts of the world, in fact. And it seems to me so deliberately self-serving for men, and in particular Muslim men, to try and deny the importance of a feminist struggle within Islam, when all that really is a reaffirmation of the essential principles within the faith itself, and a recognition that those principles have been deeply subverted and need to be redressed. That is essentially what the feminist struggle is, but it can't stand alongside. It doesn't exist on its own. I would refer everyone to the Kumbahi River Collective statement, which for me is a referential text on feminism. But Black feminists have for a very long time pointed out that feminism cannot exist in a vacuum. Who are Black women trying to be equal to when Black men aren't equal to white men? That's the key here. So obviously what we're saying, or at least what I am saying, and I know a lot of other people that I consider to be feminist pioneers argue, is that feminism is one part of a broader struggle, but it has to exist along class struggle, against anti-racism, yes, and Bell Hooks also obviously spoke a lot about these issues, and the idea that a feminist movement that doesn't take into account what often gets called intersectional feminism today, although I know there's a pushback against that term, but the idea that feminism exists alongside other struggles for equality, and if you can't see, and it's so blindingly obvious to me that women continue to suffer from the abuse of male power, then I almost don't really know where to begin the conversation. I'm actually really only interested in speaking with people who realize there is a problem, but maybe don't necessarily know how to move forward with it. If you can't see the problem, my friend, you just need to open your eyes. And once you've done that, then cool, let's talk. But there is not much conversation to be had with anyone that doesn't see the imbalance, in 2022, even in the UK. I mean, before getting to Muslim majority countries, which I would refer to as Muslim majority rather than Muslim, because I don't know to what extent it could be said that the values that guide the framework or the governing framework of that country could be said to reflect Islamic principles. To me, maybe call me an idealist and I will take it. For me,
you're an idealist.
I am. No, I am, and I really actually believe in the power of idealism.
I'm pot calling kettle black. I'm the biggest idealist going. It's like ridiculous, but yeah, keep that.
We need idealism. It's what's going to keep hope alive and keep a belief that there is a different world is possible. But even here in the UK, it's 2022, and I'm a single parent household. Like, fathers in this country are not required to, even by law, take full responsibility for their children. They have to make derisory payments. They very rarely can be enforced to actually take social, moral responsibility for their children. All of that falls back on women. There is very little structure in place to support women when men abscond from responsibility. There's also very little in the way of childcare support for raising children, which continues to be something that is assumed to be something that women have to take the hit on, particularly in terms of their own careers. Careers on everything. Child rearing is a big part of, a choice that you make when you become a parent, but it's a choice you both make when you become a parent.
So on that point, when you said both, I mean, I was actually, the point I was going to raise, that do you think part of the problem, without at all ever, suggesting that there isn't a huge disparity as far as how, men all too often treat women, there's a huge problem. And I think, I don't like using the phrase toxic masculinity because sometimes it's overused, but it's a huge problem because anyway, what I was going to say is, do you think part of the problem is in fact the societal, how communities are structured? We no longer have communities, right? What's the saying? It takes a village to raise a child.
100%.
Where are the villages anymore? I don't see any villages. Do you? Yeah. I mean, we have villages in theory, but no one knows anyone. The people don't know their next door neighbors. So maybe, without again by any means at all suggesting that there isn't this huge problem, but if even with two present parents raising a child or two children, whatever the case may be, it's very difficult. Raising children is a full-time job, and then some. Yeah. Like, you have to raise children in your sleep.
Yeah.
Almost. I'm joking, but almost.
Well, I mean, the thing is, it's a 7 days a week, 18-hour shift job. It starts before your day job and it ends long after the children have gone to bed. But I guess for me, that's almost like a separate question to the feminist struggle for me.
Sure. Right. No, it is a separate question. But I think we have, like, the problems are so multifaceted, and these are very complex problems. So yes, we absolutely 100%. I mean, I think one of my missions genuinely is to like one of the reasons why I think there's so much toxicity amongst men today is men don't know we don't know how, all too often, we don't know what it means to be a man. Like, so we grow a beard and whatever, long hair for me, but that's optional. It's like, what are your responsibilities? How do you engage with the opposite sex, right? For example, what can society expect of you? Like traditionally, historically, men had initiation rituals. Like that was part and parcel of becoming a man. You went through something very rigorous, very difficult, intentionally so, to mark a very clearly demarcate between your life previously as a boy and then now this new life as a man. And it's not a joke. It's not. But now we have all these freaking man babies running around. Like it's like I hate them. There's so many freaking man babies running around. And part of the reason why that is the case is men don't have mentors anymore. Who are the real balanced men? I'm not talking about, we don't need saints per se, right? Like, let's forget about saints. Let's talk about men who are men. They embody a sense of masculinity that other men can look to and say, he's cool. I want to be a bit like him, and women don't see them and don't see them and think, oh my God, what a scary human being. Like, it's masculinity is not a bad thing, right? In and of itself, it's a very important aspect of the human. It's part of the balance, and we all have masculine and feminine dimensions. This is one of my obsessions, actually. But it's women have a masculine dimension as well as a feminine dimension just as much. Yeah. I mean, sometimes I've heard it put. It's like this in heterosexual men. Typically, the energy typically is in the masculine dimension, but we also have the feminine aspect, and we have to learn to integrate. We have to develop both. Like, it's not a given that we're going to develop them just by virtue of being a guy. Same with women. Women have to develop their feminine side just as much as they have to learn how to work with their masculine, right? And it's a dance.
What's so crazy to me is that so many men resist the idea of sort of engaging or developing or working on their feminine side. And the maddest thing is there's literally nothing sexier than a guy who actually is in touch with his feminine side. Like, you could do all the sit-ups you want, my man. Like, you actually have some level of
that's the real reason I developed my feminine side. I'm joking.
But it's the truth.
That's the only reason. No, look, it's I'm artistic by temperament, so I was always kind of predisposed towards developing my feminine side. So the masculine aspect of my being, like I had to very consciously develop in recent years. And there's a long, complex history. I mean, the son of a very kind of archetypally alpha, tough, to put it mildly, father.
Yeah.
So I realized relatively recently that, oh my God, I said to myself unconsciously, I want to be anything, like I want to be the opposite. So my father's this entrepreneur, I want to be an academic, he's like very rational, I'm going to be the artist, blah, blah. But like, in order to be balanced though, we have to develop both. And so the masculine, it didn't come easily. Like it's a daily struggle. It's a life journey, and it's a struggle. It's a daily, like, just like if I want to be fit, I have to work out.
Yeah.
I have to eat well, etc., etc. I have to do my sit-ups, even if it's not as sexy as developing my feminine side. I'm joking, but
I mean, let's face it, everyone wants both. But I mean, a guy who can do like 100 setups but is incapable of sitting down and having a mature conversation around issues in a relationship is not, isn't.
Well, we have far too many man babies, and this is a huge problem. Men are not. They're not. We don't have. I'm kind of repeating myself here. We don't have mentors, but also decent male friends who are going to call, their friends out on their shit. Like, dude, you are really, what you're doing is shit. You need to man up.
So when you were talking about toxic masculinity, which I agree gets thrown around a lot, for me, that's a really important and actually quite easy to challenge aspect of toxic masculinity. So there are so many scenarios that I hear about where, it could be someone sharing details of an intimate moment with a group of male friends and everyone having a bit of a laugh about it. Clearly that was not consented to, although, that person consented to have an intimate moment with that one person. She didn't consent for that information to then be shared with a group of friends. It only takes one in the group to say, do you think she would be happy with
the so-called sort of locker room talk? I don't know why. Maybe it's because of my strong, like, feminine side. Like I've always found that very kind of abhorrent, and not just because of the Islamic sort of ethics around that. Just I always found that really weird. Like, what exactly, to your point? Like, this was an intimate moment between two people, individuals, consenting adults, etc. Like, why? So I mean, we need to really raise the bar. Men do.
But it could be, so for, I think in Muslim communities, like for me, it's things like, when was the last time that you spent time, that you gave your wife her time, like that you said, babe, I'm taking the kids, you clearly need some downtime. If you want to, whatever you want to do, this is your time. I can see how hard you work. What about, how often are you the one who initiates responsibility for the domestic tasks that are a burden on every woman's mind? And what I mean by that is, she shouldn't have to say to you, can you cook dinner tonight? And you shouldn't pat yourself on the back for saying yes. You should already be like, babe, Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday, it's me. You don't even have to think about it. In fact, you don't even have to do the shop because I will be on that. It's seeing the kids' dirty clothes and knowing they have sports day the next day, actually doing the laundry and packing the bag. It's, knowing that it's her mum's birthday coming up and not leaving all of the organization of the celebration to her. It's recognizing also her emotional and, we don't talk about these at all, but sexual needs. Men in many communities continue to think of sex as something that men do to women. They very rarely recognize that actually women are sexual, sensual beings who have needs. They are not just objects for you to dispense yourself in.
Well, it's an interesting fact of Islamic history. Muslims don't know this, and Muslims, one of the reasons I would argue why Muslims are in the deplorable state that we're in today is because we literally don't know our history. We certainly don't know our intellectual tradition, etc. Major Muslim thinkers throughout history wrote what today would be considered pillow books, like, sex manuals.
That's right. Yeah.
Because why? The blessed prophet said, don't go to your wife as a he camel goes to a she camel, takes its pleasure and leaves. Like, that's the nugget, that's the prophetic kind of seed based on which there's this flowering of and there's one book, I wrote this encyclopedia entry on sexuality a few years ago, and so it happened to be the case I did some research in this as in writing that. And there's one, I forget the book's name now, sadly, because it was a few years ago now.
There is an encyclopedia of erotology. So it was called Erotology. So we talk about the difference between how we think about sex today in the Western world and how Muslim thinkers, Islamic thinkers historically thought about sex, was that sex was never just like a penetrative act between people. This whole culture of sensuality, of trying to charm the other person. There was a lot of foreplay involved. There was a lot of enticement.
And seduction is, we've lost the art of seduction, right? I think we've lost it, in the West as much as the rest of the world, maybe more so in the rest of, I don't know. I haven't lived in the rest of the world for a long time now, but this one particular manual in which I think there's like 30 plus different names just for the penis and the vagina. So it's like, and we can't even talk about these things in everyday discourse now. Muslims like, oh my God. No, look. Okay, speaking of the other and the orientalization of the Muslim, right, historically. So it's very, very interesting how this plays out in history. And it's been noted, but I don't think enough hay has been made of this point, because I think it's a very profound point. So early Christian observers, Western Christian observers in, visiting the Muslim lands, right?
Yeah.
They were struck by the lasciviousness of Muslim culture. I mean, Muslims, Ottoman society literally had brothels. Like it literally
We're not looking to resurrect that bit, but yeah.
So look, okay, that's not Islamically correct, but the point is there were very, sensual, the hammams and things like that, right? So then what happened? So historically, when Western Christendom had a particular understanding of the body and, and procreation and sexuality, etc., which is very different from how it is today, it viewed the Muslim world as being lascivious, licentious, lewd, etc., etc. Now, all of a sudden, that the West is like so sexually progressive and permissive and so on and so forth. So now Muslims are so sexually repressive, right? Yeah. So it's interesting how that plays out as well.
Well, so two things. So obviously the early Muslims who were engaging with Islamic culture were, prudish Victorians, and Victorians were, this is an era of like, you have sex under the sheets with the light out, like this is lie back and think of England version of sex. Definitely no notions of pleasure, which were very much part of the discourse within Islamic societies because of all this literature around sensuality, erotology. And so, of course, the licentiousness of Muslims was, this is where 1001 Nights was brought back, and it was actually censored. There were stories that were considered too racy for Western audiences, and they were actually taken out. I mean, the version we get today is like the child's version of the original. The original, I think, would actually, and this is the funny bit, shock a lot of Muslims today. And on the other point, permissiveness is not the same thing in sex as progressiveness, in my humble opinion. I think what we can take from our manuals on erotology, but also what other religious traditions, I'm thinking particularly Hindu traditions, beyond the Kama Sutra, which obviously gets a lot of attention, but was never designed as a sex manual. It was a spiritual book within other books. It was never a book about positions, which is what obviously like the bastardized version we get in the West today. What you get within these books on erotology are entire traditions around intimacy and around sensuality. And I think that's where, if we want to talk about where, in my opinion, a lot of men are lacking in this particular domain, is that they are getting their sexual references from pornography. So, for example, I would say I would never want to be with someone who watches pornography. Now, I know that when I make this comment, a lot of people laugh and they go, "Are you crazy? All guys watch pornography." That is actually probably true, which is why I am where I am. But what I will say is that that's also part of toxic masculinity, the enabling of the normalization of watching pornography versus educating yourself around erotology and sensual traditions and lovemaking and what that actually can be to enhance female pleasure. And you mentioned like a lot of men feeling like they don't know what their role is in this world. Your role is to be in service to others, starting with your family and also starting with your wife. How are you in service to her on a daily basis? How are you helping support her? Is that something that actually even factors in your brain? Because I'll be honest, I don't think it does for a lot of guys. Like,
because they're man babies. Man babies only care about themselves.
That's right.
And I'm glad you touched upon the question of porn, because it's a huge problem, and it's sadly very, very common. It's consumption, and it's very interesting. Also, historically, I remember hearing about this way back when, that for the longest time, pornographers they tried, but with very minimal results, in creating women-friendly porn. Like women, and it turns out, women are wired slightly differently than men. Women are more cerebral. Shock horror, women are more cerebral, they're more visual, right?
Yeah.
But interestingly now, more and more, and from what I can tell, that women are increasingly consuming porn now as well. But it's a huge problem. I think it's a huge problem. Yeah. Well, it's a market for it, but also I think people are just, there's something I don't know. I mean, you can call me conspiracy theorist or whatever, but I think there's normalization happening across the board. You know, the lines are being blurred between porn and movies, and there's some. But you know, it's very weird. I mean, we no longer, the erotic is no longer celebrated so much, right? As you say, and very kind of simplified and I don't even know how to, kind of brutish sex has taken over, right?
I think there is an attempt around the movement of, you know, so-called feminist porn, not all of which I would necessarily advocate. But, you know, I think that the idea within driving at least some of the feminist porn movement has been the idea of resurrecting an eroticism that is rooted in something beyond, you know, what men are doing to women. And, you know, there's obviously like whole plots, you know, and there's a lot more to them.
I wonder if the medium in and of itself can be salvaged, though. I seriously doubt. It's very problematic because it's one thing, I think, to read literature, and like that's a very different experience from witnessing an act. It just I don't know. I think there's something personally. I mean, in sort of ideal terms, this is how I tend to think. I think you know, the human body is sacred, and you know there's certain conditions under which, you know, I mean, look, I mean, there's so many problems now with people's personal, you know, photos and what have you being plastered across the internet. I mean, there's huge issues with privacy now. I mean, this stuff is really dark. Anyway, but I mean, I don't know how we got on to talking about porn, but well, I mean, the relationship. I mean, the traditional, or if we don't want to use that word, the balance between the masculine and the feminine dimensions, which is a divine balance, which is divinely mandated and promised for us, right? If we do the work, right, then we can see it manifest in our, you know, individual and our personal lives, in our family lives, and you know, onwards and outwards in society. But it takes work, and it takes men, because as far as I'm concerned, I'm not saying this, you know, because this has been my shtick for some time now. I'm not just saying this now. Like, as far as I can tell, by and large, you know, with exceptions, of course, because no one's perfect. I mean, you know, by and large, women are doing the work, by and large, relatively speaking. Men all too often aren't, with rare exceptions. I think there's some incredible men out there as well. But I think the huge imbalance that we have, if it's not addressed sooner rather than later, we're only going to go from one deepening, you know, ever deepening nightmare to another ever deepening nightmare. It's
Well, I think women are, by and large, if we can make the generalization, we tend to be more relational, as in we tend to have more conversations with our, you know, I mean, I joke about this all the time with my friends who are guys. I'm like, oh, you know, if I meet up with my girlfriends, we will have like a couple of hours debrief on everyone's, where you at, what's going on in your relationship, how are you feeling, what's your state of mind, what's troubling you, advice, you know, input, you know, we challenging, unpicking. And then I'll speak to one of my guy friends and I'll be like, what did you guys talk about? And be like, the football. For 3 hours, like that's ridiculous. You guys didn't talk about like where you're at, what's going on, like how you feel. And I'm sure this is changing, you know, there are, I'm sure, like I think particularly with like Gen Z, you know, the guys in the Gen Z generation are a lot more open to those conversations.
Well, no, so my fear though, that's probably true. My fear though, I mean, I hope, and it's an ongoing discussion and project, right? I mean, it's a lifelong thing, but I hope they're not losing sight of the important, you know, masculine dimension as well, right? Because too much of one thing, you know, too much of a good thing, no matter what that thing may be, is a bad thing, right? So people because we also have a plague of nice men, right? Like, men who kind of like really sort of sappy and polite. I'm not saying men should be nasty. So often people react like you're saying, like nice men are a bad thing. Yeah, men who, they have to be compassionate, they have to be kind. That doesn't mean nice. Sometimes standing one's ground in society in general means taking on tough positions, like a position that one has to sometimes die for. That's not, a nice guy can't do that, you know?
It's interesting because I actually think this is not, nice is not the right word. I think that the guys who get called the nice guys are men who are not necessarily driven by a cause higher than themselves, and that could be some sort of like life goal, some ambition, some like deep sense of achievement, and so they're sort of just like floating along life, and actually they're decent guys, but they're just not that interesting because actually they're not sort of driven by something a bit more visceral. And so instead, because we live in patriarchy, instead of saying, well, your problem is that you're not actually pushing yourself to figure out what your higher purpose is and why you're not actually giving it everything you have, we say, oh, it's because he's too nice. No. We could keep the nice bits. Everything about him being nice and compassionate and understanding, we want to keep. What we want in addition,
well, you see,
is a man-driven sense of purpose.
You know, I'll push back a little bit against that, only because I'm not nice, clearly. But no, only because, look, this is my understanding. It's all too often the so-called nice guys, in keeping with everything you've said. I mean, it's all of that, and relatedly, they just haven't really worked on themselves. They haven't really developed their inner core, like not in a muscular sense, like in their inner, you know. I mean, I've heard it put like this: that men, you know, the nice guy or the wide-eyed kind of guy, he just sits there and it's like the world is just impacting upon his eyes. You can almost see there's almost like a wide-eyed character aspect to the way he presents himself. Whereas a man, and look, it's an ongoing project. It's not a case of doing something, that's the end of the story. It's ongoing every day. Men, however, when they look out onto the world, you can see that they're projecting onto the world something. There's something coming from within. That's because they've taken the time to develop themselves. They've taken years out of their lives to study, to reflect, to grow, to contribute, etc., etc., etc. So, and all too often, the nice guy, I've experienced this, you know, too many times at this point. It's really not fun. As a guy, I've experienced this. The nice guy all too often will stab you in the back. Like, he's all very sweet talking on the surface. When push comes to shove, because he hasn't really developed himself as a man, he really doesn't have true substance yet. He's getting there. He will, you know, when the proverbial shit hits the fan, he'll turn around and be like, oh my God, did you hear what oh my God, blah, 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 blah. Instead of owning his stuff, admitting where he went wrong, etc. But anyway.
Yeah, so I just think that's much more to do with, you know, men going on a journey of self-discovery, self-understanding, and connection to a sense of higher purpose. And that in a patriarchal world, that gets dismissed because that would actually require men doing some work. That gets dismissed in favor of, you just need to be a bit more of an asshole in your relationship with women and you'll be fine.
Oh, no, that's not what I'm saying at all, though.
No, I'm sure that's not what you're saying, but a lot of the kind of don't be the nice guy discourse is kind of like treat her mean to keep her keen, this kind of
No, I don't believe that at all. I believe, like I have less patience for men doing crap stuff to me than women. And, you know, I'm just kind of, I have more patience for, like, I can put up with a lot more, you know, because women are human beings and crappiness comes up every so often, right? That's just the nature of things. I'm more willing to put up with, you know, certain of those things for women than I am for men. Like, because I try to hold myself to high standards, and I expect, you know, the men around me to hold themselves to higher standards as well. So. Anyway,
I hope so.
well, I mean, there aren't any, and the alternative is miserable, and it's not worth it.